We are joined today by Diane Barber, Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Child Care Association. For those who may not be familiar, what is the role of the PA Child Care Association?
The Pennsylvania Child Care Association, otherwise known as PACA, is a statewide membership organization of the entities that operate child care programs. So that includes single and multi-site child care centers, group homes, and family child care programs.
Last week, an article was released in Spotlight PA that details that many daycare centers in Pennsylvania have closed. Why is that? What happened?
Oh, yeah. Why has that happened? Well, it was probably coming for a long time. But COVID really, we forget that, it's been we're going into 5 years since COVID, right? But I think COVID brought everything to the forefront. So when we started to close programs because of COVID, many programs then couldn't reopen. And in part, and the single thing, if I could point to, is staffing. And because what happened is when we closed our programs, we had a workforce that needed to work. And so they found other jobs, and they found jobs that paid them more than we could pay them in childcare. And it's been a hard recovery. Even with the influx of federal dollars to kind of stabilize the system, a childcare, the choice between working in childcare or in any early education program and working at Target, Target pays more. Chick-fil-A pays more. Walmart pays more and has benefits. So this is kind of the underlying issue that is stressing the industry. And then on top of that, we have what stresses us, right? The increased costs that have been associated with whether it's electricity, food, rent, all of those other operating costs have just contributed on top of the staffing issue.
What are consequences for parents who cannot find adequate childcare for their children?
Yeah, this is the scary piece, right? Parents have to work. They have children, they have to work. And so what do? And so probably the scariest thing that I experience is when I look at social media and I see parents desperate for care because they need to work. And they say, I'm desperate for care. I start a new job on Monday. I need somebody to take care of my infant. Is there anybody out there to take care of my infant? So parents are in a big bind. Where do they go? They tap their friends, they tap their families, and then they try to find other ways. They try to work with their employers, and some employers are still working to provide some flexibility in terms of working at home. But you're still working, whether you're at home or whether you're in the office. So what do you do? And so the big choice is, do I work? Do I stay home? Who takes care of my child? So that's the conundrum. It's extremely, I hate to say, because I don't want to make it trite, because challenging is not the word when you're faced with these decisions. So,
what has been done so far to address the lack of child care facilities?
Sure. So it's not it's an interesting, it's not a demand issue, right? It's really about a supply issue. And we have, people talking about, large businesses should start their own childcare programs. Or, we have childcare deserts and, there's just nothing operating and we should still put more childcare there. And in some cases, there are childcare deserts where there never was any childcare there. But in other cases, the childcare is there. It's just not operating at capacity. And because what we've seen over these last 4 years and continues today is programs they may not close the entire program, although many have, but they close rooms or they shorten their hours. And so, how do you do that? And, one of the things that we advocated for in this last budget was a pool of funding that would help providers pay staff more. So we asked for $284 million in new and recurring funding that would provide a stipend or some support for the 54,000 child care workers in Pennsylvania. So we need to address the staffing crisis immediately. If we don't have staff, we don't have programs. So if you open a program in a company, you still have to find people to work for you. So it's no different than the child care program that's operating down the street that can't find people and have closed their classrooms. I think one of the things that's really scary, and this it's the timing was appropriate, is yesterday I was talking to our staff, and they had 12 pieces of mail returned by the United States Postal Service that we had sent out about a month ago to programs because they couldn't deliver them because those programs were closed. That's just 12, and it's first class nonprofit. We don't always get it back, but that's 12 that came in the last week. We're also doing membership renewals, and we've got 7 programs that we know are not renewing, and that's just a snapshot. Those are the programs who called us. We're in the process now of looking at our membership renewals and seeing, are those programs still around? So this is, it's a crisis. I mean, everybody talks about it. Even last night, during the presentation by Vice President Harris, she listed childcare as one of the priorities of her campaign and her, if elected, her administration. It's yeah. I just shake my head and go, it's bad. It's really bad. And, I feel for parents. My niece has 3 children under the age of 5. And she called me and she said, Aunt Diane, I can't find childcare. And I said, but you're going to deliver the 3rd, next week. We should have started on this a month ago, or no, I can't even say a month ago. When you found out, when you got the test back, we should have started then. So, yeah, it's tough.
I know you mentioned...
That's so profound, right? That's so profound. It's tough. It's really tough.
I know you mentioned asking for funding from the budget. Did you get anything out of the budget at all?
Well, we got something. Okay, so I don't want to say we didn't get anything. So there were some initiatives within the budget that help. So there is a new employer tax credit that helps families who have childcare, who work for employers that will contribute to their childcare, help reduce those costs. So that's one thing. But again, families have to have childcare in order to have access to that. The other thing that we got was $26 million. And what that does is that will help sustain some of the activities that were funded with the pandemic funding. So what that did is it allowed families to, in part, stay in the subsidized childcare system as their income grew higher. So it went from 235% of poverty that they could stay in up to 300%. So it helps a little bit towards the cliff. It also did a couple of other things for off-hours care, but it wasn't enough to, it's not going to be enough to address some of the bigger issues. The other thing that is good too, is that the payment rates for subsidized childcare will move from the 60th percentile to the 75th percentile. And what that means is that providers will now be paid at the same rate as 75% of their colleagues or other programs in the field. Unfortunately, what that doesn't do, it's not enough to address moving a staff wage from $12 an hour to a livable wage. But what it will help is it will help a little with the rising operating costs. So it'll help, maybe you're able to put a little bit more towards, the electricity and food and a few other things. But we need a big influx. I mean, if we really want to make a difference, and I think that and what's real is that those people who endorsed the campaign and the ask, included businesses and chambers and the military and law enforcement and some policymakers. I mean, they know that this is a need, and we talk about it as the workforce behind the workforce. If we don't have the childcare workforce, then the rest of our economy, the workforce and the rest of our economy can't work. We thought we had proved that when we closed all those centers at the start of COVID, and people said, well, what about first responders? What about, our health folks? We need childcare. So we have very short memories, I guess, unfortunately. So, yeah.
The same Spotlight PA article about all of the childcare facilities closing also mentioned a Childcare Works program. Are you familiar with that program, and what do they do?
So that's Pennsylvania's childcare subsidy program. And what that allows is for families who are working and who are income eligible. And right now it's they can enter. They're eligible for Childcare Works as long as their income does not exceed 200% of poverty. So that's what they can apply. And then they're able to stay into the program now up to 300% of poverty. So it's not a free program. The fee that they pay is based on their income and their size of their family. So it rises as income rises. Their contribution rises. It keeps their payment, though, at about 7% of annual income. So it makes it affordable, but it is a system that is typically overtaxed. But because of where we are in terms of childcare, there is no waiting list for that program. And that at this time of year, in any kind of normal year, we would have seen thousands of children waiting on that list. And that's just not the case. So that alone tells us something about the need for where the system is. There's just over 2,000 children on the list, 2,500, somewhere around there, that are on a waiting list for Childcare Works, because it's not that their families aren't eligible, it's because they can't find a placement. So, and that's just the Childcare Works waiting list. If we were to talk about just generally, childcare providers, they have waiting lists that are months long, perhaps years long. It's parents are getting desperate. Yeah. So somebody said to me not too long ago, I think it was in context of the article that was in Spotlight PA, well, providers should just raise their rates so that they can pay teachers more. Well, we wish it would be that simple, but then parents can't afford to pay, and it's already a very expensive. It's an expensive expense, right? It's so yeah. I'm sorry, I keep going. Yeah, because my mind just keeps wandering. I've been doing this way too long. But it is a system. It's not like, I mean, when we think about childcare, I mean, where are the expenses? It's people heavy, okay? So it's not like you can say, oh, we'll just serve more kids. No, because you can only serve so many. We have a set of childcare certification regulations that say you cannot, single teacher, serve more than 4 infants. You can't serve more than 5 toddlers. You can't serve more than 10 preschoolers. So so we have these limits on our ability to say, okay, well, we'll just put more babies in that room, and you'll get more income because you're serving more babies. And, we could even say that with the school age population. But if you're ever been the teacher in that room with with 4 babies, and all 4 babies need to be fed at the same time. Or you need to, you have toddlers that are kind of like walking and playing and jumping and doing all kinds of crazy things. This is hard. This is hard work. So it's physically challenging work. It's emotionally challenging work, and you need to have an educational basis for knowing why you're doing what you're doing and why the kids are doing what they're doing when they're doing it. So age appropriate, developmentally appropriate.
My last question for you is, do you see an effect in the cost of open childcare centers as more of them keep closing?
Well, it's, what's interesting is, if you were to ask me this question a year ago, there had been 2,200 programs that we knew of that had closed completely since 2020 as a result of the pandemic. But the net loss was only around 550. So what we know is that while programs closed, new programs opened, which is good, right? But what that doesn't tell us is, did they open in those communities where the programs closed? And those new programs, how long are they going to be able to stay open if they can't staff? And so the bottom line, overall is staffing. If we can't find staff, if we can't find qualified staff, then we can't have programs. And it makes it more challenging for families because they end up on a waiting list that, are way, way too long, or prices go up. And the only people who can afford it are the people who can afford it. So yeah, that's not the solution. Gosh, I wish I had the solution. Everybody asks me, what's the solution? And I'm like, gosh, if I knew the solution after 30 years, I would share that solution. But what we know is we're at a tipping point now. And those 12 programs whose mail was delivered, sent back to us, the 7 programs that, I've heard either are closing or have closed in the last, less than a month. That's a cascade.
We've been speaking with Diane Barber, Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Child Care Association. Thank you for your time.